I didn't even hear the car pull up. One minute I was folding laundry on a quiet Saturday morning, and the next, I saw my kids dragging their suitcases up the front steps, 4 days early, wearing the same worn flip-flops they'd left in, sunburnt and silent. I opened the door, heart buckling. "What happened?" I asked, my voice rising with every heartbeat. My youngest, Noah, clutched his stuffed dinosaur so tightly I thought the seams would tear. Lily, my oldest, shrugged in that way she does when she's trying not to cry. "Grandma said we had to go home," she murmured. "Jackson was coming. There weren't enough beds." I blinked. "Jackson? Your cousin?" "Yeah," she said, and then added with a quiet bitterness that didn't belong in a 10-year-old. "She said we'd understand. Because Jackson's special." I could barely breathe. I helped them inside, made hot chocolate even though it was 90 degrees outside, and let them sit on the couch while I stood by the sink, trying to keep my hands from shaking. They hadn't even called me. My own parents. Naively, I'd let them take the kids to the beach house for family week, a tradition they had kept alive only selectively over the years. I hadn't gone myself in a long time. I rarely felt welcome, but I thought maybe they were trying. I thought maybe, just maybe, they saw the kids as family even if I'd become the black sheep. But no, not when Jackson was coming. Jackson, the golden grandson. The one whose father, my brother, inherited everything without even needing to ask. The one my parents couldn't stop showing off on Facebook. Straight A's, tennis scholarships, smile worth 1,000 likes. My kids were kicked out of a vacation for him. Lily finally broke down later that night. She told me how they had helped Grandma clean the house, how Noah had wiped windows while Grandpa barked that he was streaking the glass, how they slept on the pull-out couch, and how Grandma whispered loud enough to hear, "We'll figure something out once Jackson arrives." Their something was sending my babies home in an Uber, alone, with packed sandwiches and a note that said, "See you soon." The shame hit harder than the anger, the kind of shame you don't know where to put. I stared out the window most of the night while they slept, tucked under blankets in their own beds. I should have known. I should have known they would do this. But now I knew something else, too. They didn't see my children as family. And the truth? They never really saw me as family either. That realization hurt in a very specific, familiar way. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't cry. Instead, I stood in that still kitchen, looking down at the untouched note by the back door, "See you soon," written in my mother's floral penmanship. And I felt something shift, something cold, something quiet. Not the kind of rage that screams in your throat, the kind that bides its time, because they had no idea what they'd just done, and they had no idea who they were messing with. It wasn't like this started with the kids. That was just the moment I finally ran out of illusions. Because deep down, I'd been living with this pattern my whole life, the one where I was always the afterthought. And my brother, Daniel, was the golden boy who could do no wrong. Even when we were kids, he never had to ask twice. He wanted the bigger room, he got it. He wanted to skip chores, I did them. If he got in trouble, somehow it became my fault. I egged him on, or I should have set a better example, even though he was older by 2 years. I vividly remember my 10th birthday party. My mom baked a cake for me, vanilla with strawberries on top. It wasn't even out of the oven before Daniel cried that he didn't like strawberries. She threw the whole thing out. Made a chocolate one. I was too sensitive for being upset. That phrase followed me everywhere. Too sensitive. Too sensitive when I spoke up. Too dramatic when I cried. Too cold when I stopped trying. That label became my shadow, while Daniel got trophies for simply existing. As we grew up, he became the pride of the family. Varsity athlete, business school grad, married well, moved into a gated community 2 states away. Jackson, his son, was born into perfection. By the time I had Lily and Noah, they were already measuring them against him. The smartest grandkid title had already been spoken for before my children could even talk. But I stayed. I showed up, took the high road, told myself every family has favorites, until I didn't. About 6 years ago, I stopped going to gatherings altogether. I couldn't ignore the way Mom would cut me off mid-sentence, or how Dad would sigh dramatically every time I mentioned struggling financially. I was a single mom working 2 jobs and still made time for birthdays and barbecue weekends, while Daniel flew in twice a year and was praised like royalty for showing up late. The tipping point came when Aunt Jo was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She wasn't close to many in the family, but she'd always been kind to me when I was little, tucking extra candies into my jacket pocket when no one was looking, mailing me postcards with handwritten love notes. I dropped everything to take care of her in her final months, visited every weekend, helped organize her affairs, held her hand when she passed. Daniel didn't even go to the funeral. And yet, when my parents thanked people at the reception, they called Daniel her favorite nephew. I didn't get so much as a mention. I stood there, holding the obituary pamphlet I helped design, and felt completely invisible. Again, so I walked away, quietly, cut contact. No big blow-up, just silence. For a while, it felt like peace. My house was warmer without their cold glances. My birthday felt lighter without their forgotten phone calls. But last year, things changed. My mom called, sounding shaken, and told me Dad had a scare, a heart issue. She said, "It's time to heal. Life's too short." She begged me to bring the kids by. I gave in, hoping desperation had opened her eyes. Maybe she finally saw what she'd lost. But now, sitting across from my kids on the couch, remembering that golden cousin pushing them out of a trip they were so excited for, I realized something. They hadn't changed. They never apologized. They never acknowledged the years without contact, or the things they said that drove me away. When I returned, they didn't greet me with remorse, just expectation, like I owed them for inviting me. Back, even their so-called healing was conditional, everything. With them always has been. What I once thought was love was just control in a better costume, and in letting them near my kids, I'd allowed history to repeat itself, but not anymore. This time, I wouldn't fade into the background. I wouldn't teach Lily and Noah that being mistreated is the price of acceptance. They picked the golden child again, but they forgot, who quietly built the bones of this family while they weren't looking. They forgot what happens when someone like me finally stops needing to be chosen. That was the part that broke me the most. Not just that they kicked my children out like stray dogs, but that my kids had spent the entire week before that trip getting the place ready. For them. For the very people who'd throw them aside the moment someone more important arrived. Because what no one in my family likes to admit, what they probably still don't know how to fully state out loud, is that the beach house isn't theirs, it's mine. Well, half mine. I put up the money almost a decade ago when my parents found the perfect retirement fixer-upper and realized they were in way over their heads. Daniel hadn't offered to help. Of course not. Not my problem, I remember him saying. So they came to me. Not with honesty, but manipulation, wrapped in guilt, Mom said. "It's an investment for the family legacy," Dad said. "It'll be yours one day." I pulled from my inheritance, the one Aunt Jo left me quietly in her will, probably knowing I'd be the only one to do something decent with it. I gave it willingly back then, because I believed in family, even after everything. Even after being left out and laughed off at every holiday dinner, I still believed. Maybe this would finally buy acceptance, or at the very least, kindness. Over the years, they managed the house while I handled taxes and repairs from a distance. I never questioned the arrangement. I wanted my kids to one day enjoy it. I never imagined they'd be the ones swept aside inside a space they helped preserve. Just 2 weeks before the trip, Lily and Noah scrubbed those floors till their knees went raw. They cleaned out the cobwebs, washed salt-stained windows, vacuumed the ancient rugs, and helped organize extra beach towels and folding chairs that had been left scattered since last season. Lily even spent the last of her allowance on scented candles and a guest basket for the rooms. She was so proud, telling me she wanted Grandma to feel welcome. Noah carried in bottled water cases like he was saving the world. I watched them, quiet, bittersweet, grateful they hadn't yet learned what I knew. That for some people, effort doesn't earn you love, it makes you useful, and when you're no longer useful, you're disposable. But I still let them go on that trip. I thought, maybe this time will be different. Maybe they'll be seen the way they deserve to be seen. Instead, they were kicked out to make room for a boy who never lifts a finger when he visits. He'd been flown in, carefree and golden, ready to walk into a house my children had polished with their hands. They don't know. My kids, bless their hearts, they still wanted to go back. Still thought maybe Grandma didn't mean it like that. Lily even whispered, "Maybe we can help more next time." No, there won't be a next time, because the house they were thrown out of, it stands on the foundation I paid for, on values they spit on and memories they erased, and from this day forward, it won't stand for them. It was the social media post that did it, a shot of Jackson grinning next to a private jet captioned, "Touchdown. Ready to rough it at the beach shack?" Shack, the house Lily vacuumed inch by inch, the one Noah cleared sand from while sneezing every 5 seconds. The house they were sent home from, quietly and without explanation, so he could walk in without lifting a finger, and he had the audacity to mock. Yet I stared at the photo until my phone screen dimmed. I could feel the silence roaring in my ears, louder than any scream. He didn't even know. Didn't know my kids were kicked out. Didn't know they'd cried quietly in the back seat. Didn't know they'd folded blankets and labeled drawers and planned what games to play during family night. And the worst part? He wouldn't have cared, not Jackson. Not the shining star with his million-watt smile and self-tapes for modeling gigs. I'd watched him grow up from a distance, always with the best of everything, always busy, always arriving last, but being greeted like the savior of Christmas. My children? They weren't even mentioned. To Jackson, the house wasn't a memory keeper. It was a photo op, a temporary filter. He posted a second shot later, lounging on one of the plastic Adirondack chairs on the porch. Chairs my dad once told Lily to stack properly because she needed to learn respect. Jackson called them retro trashcore in all caps. Tagged fashion brands. Laughed in the comments. I sat at my desk scrolling through the sea of praise, watching emojis and compliments pile up like confetti around him. No one knew the cost. No one knew the labor. No one saw the difference between those who arrived by jet and those who carried beach chairs in their arms. That contrast sat with me all evening. Jackson's arrival wasn't just about a favorite showing up. It was about hierarchy, about a clear, gleaming line between who matters and who doesn't. My children, they were lawn chairs, useful, disposable, quiet. I was too, once. Maybe I still was in their eyes. The know-it-all daughter who chose the wrong career, raised her kids too softly, didn't remarry, and clearly didn't know how to raise golden children like Jackson. But I wasn't weak. Not anymore, because silence is a sword if you know how to use it. And as much as I wanted to call my parents and scream that they'd raised a smug brat incapable of gratitude, I didn't. I let the posts keep coming. I let the story write itself. I bookmarked every photo, saved every word, noted every tag and timestamp. And when Jackson smugly posted a story panning across the porch with a mocking, "This place gives summer camp energy," I smirked, because I knew something he didn't. That camp was on my land, so let them sit pretty in the throne they thought belonged to them. Let them toast their golden child and pose beneath the sunset I had paid for. Their ignorance wasn't just insulting, it was useful, and soon it would be expensive. There's a particular silence I've learned to master over the years, not the kind that fills the room awkwardly, but the kind that sits beside you, unbothered, that hums like background music while people pretend they don't hear the lyrics. That's the silence I brought to dinner. It was supposed to be a family catch-up. Same beach house, same chipped plates, same people rearranging chairs like royalty was arriving. My father grilled salmon. My mother poured too much wine. Jackson scrolled his phone in the living room, shoes on the coffee table. I sat down last. Not because I was late, because I wanted to watch how their bodies shifted the moment I took my place. It didn't take long for the little digs to start. Mom passed me the salad tongs and smiled too broadly. "I wasn't sure you'd come. You've always been so unpredictable." I smiled back with a softness that wasn't real. Jackson looked up for a second. "Noah and Lily not coming? Weird without kids running around." "They weren't invited," I said evenly. There was a pause. The kind where everyone hears you but pretends they didn't. Then Daniel chuckled. You know Mom, she gets flustered with too many noisemakers around. And just like that, my kids were reduced to noisemakers. I cut a slice of salmon. Chewed slowly. Smiled again. I said nothing. Because nothing worked better than that. Let them trip over their entitlement. Let them ignore the weight in the room while mistaking my quiet for forgiveness. I'd seen this table before. Sat at it dozens of times growing up. Heated debates where my answers were talking back. Shared. Grades that were never as good as Daniel's. Journal. Entries found and read aloud in mocking voices. You're being too sensitive. It's just a joke. We're all family here. No, we weren't. We were a kingdom. One ruler, one heir. And the rest of us. Servants, jesters, cautionary tales. I let the conversation drown in itself. They talked over each other like usual. Dad ranting about real estate. Mom digging for compliments about the appetizers. Daniel throwing out humble brags about Jackson's new modeling campaign. I just listened. Calm. Still. Like a witness at a crime scene. No one mentioned Lily's tears. No one asked how Noah had slept since they came home. No one connected the missing children to the full wine glasses in tension, blocking the entrance like fog. That was when I realized I wasn't invisible anymore, had become unknowable, and unknowable is far more dangerous, so I said nothing. I let the smile rest on my lips. I let them believe I was being cordial, but inside, that silence was doing something else entirely. Writing, plotting, rebuilding, the map they thought they'd drawn for me. They thought silence meant surrender. They had no idea it was the beginning of their removal. After the dinner, I walked through the beach house alone, not because I was lost, but because I needed to remember what I'd invested. Every corner of that place carried fingerprints. Most weren't mine, visibly. None of the picture frames held photos of my kids. None of the throw pillows were ones I'd picked. But still, I had built this, quietly, forgettably, completely. I went home that night and pulled the upstairs storage bin down from my bedroom closet, the one I hadn't dared open in years. Inside were files, manila folders, contracts, notarized copies, paper proof that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined all those late nights poring over budgets, that I hadn't invented the email trail where I agreed to front thousands for a remodel my parents couldn't afford. No one ever talks about how betrayal isn't just bitterness. Sometimes it's a math problem. A spreadsheet of receipts unwelcome at the family table. I flipped through the file labeled Crescent Shore Property, renovation funding. There it was. My name, a check stub, a transfer note from the account Aunt Jo left me in her will. $38,750 transferred directly into my parents' joint fund. The plan was always to build something for the family, and I believed them. Of course I did. I was still soft then. Still looking for belonging in handmade casseroles and Sunday deadlines. I remember Dad saying, "Once this place is finished, it'll be your kids' second home. A place they'll always have." That word, always, stuck. Funny how easily it dissolves when your children are told they no longer fit. Tucked behind the check stub was a short memo, drafted by a cheap lawyer they'd used for years. At the time, they'd offered me 49% silent ownership in exchange for the upfront cash. "Nothing will ever really be in writing," I remembered my mom saying. "We don't need that between family, do we?" But there it was. That silent share, barcode stamped, witnessed, flimsy but real. And at the bottom, a note from the lawyer in fine print. All management of the property may be reassigned if either party ceases to uphold intended shared use access. Care, or familial goodwill toward all named heirs. I read that 5 times. Familial goodwill. It wasn't airtight, not in court, but it was enough to start stirring the pot. Enough to say, there are consequences. The air around me changed. Not outwardly, no. I still dropped the kids off at school. I still made pasta and paid bills, but something cold settled inside me. Like a gathering storm no one sees until the sky turns black. This wasn't about a beach house anymore. Not really. This was about every time my voice was talked over, every family chat where my name was missing, every eye roll when I walked in a room, every time they conveniently forgot Lily's birthday, every time they described Noah as a bit soft, It was about being told I wasn't enough, only to give more and have it taken with a smile. They thought I'd absorb this like every other wound. But they didn't know this time. They cut too close to the bone. When someone touches your children, pushes them into the same margins you spent your entire life escaping, something changes. Something feral wakes up. This wasn't rage. Not really, it was hunger. For balance. For reckoning. For truth to be seen without me ever needing to raise my voice. They gave me silence for years. Now I'd return it with interest. So I hired someone. Quietly. The same lawyer recommended by a friend I trusted. One who specialized in property disputes. Silent partners. Family co-ownership gone toxic. We met for coffee under a different name. I wore sunglasses. I handed him the folder and told him not what I wanted in revenge, but in recognition. This house is mine as much as theirs, I said, and I want them to remember they built it with my money, not their love. He opened the folder, flipped through papers, and nodded slowly. They've probably forgotten that. I smiled, not kindly. Oh, I know, I said. That's the part I plan to fix. I didn't tell a soul, not my kids. Not my friends, not even my reflection in the mirror. Some storms are quieter when they move in silence. So while the family group chat was buzzing with plans for the upcoming long weekend, meal pairings, towel rotations, who was bringing sunscreen, I was on a different email thread, one with my attorney, Elaine, who didn't flinch when I asked if there was a way to pull all administrative access from my parents without notifying them, yet. There is, she said. But it'll cause waves later. I count on it, I replied. It wasn't about being petty. It was about reclaiming ground I'd been convinced never to stand on. See, my parents had enjoyed years of casual ownership, fielding bookings, handling repairs, decorating the place as if it were theirs alone. Meanwhile, I paid half the taxes, half the utilities, and never once got a say in how it was used. They made the rules, controlled the guest list, until now. Elaine filed a notice of administrative reassignment on my behalf. The clause in the original agreement gave either owner the right to request full decision-making control if the shared-use contract was violated, and kicking out my children? That wasn't just emotional, it was legal. Submit the revocation, I told her. Effective immediately. From that moment forward, I was sole manager of the property. The beauty of it was they had no idea. They were still in planning mode. Sending Pinterest decor for the traditional family clam bake. Jackson posted an Instagram poll. What color linen shirt should I wear to the fam bash? I screenshotted it, not because it mattered, but because it symbolized everything they believed they had access to. That weekend belonged to me now, and I didn't feel the need to waste it. Instead, I quietly relisted the property. Made it available for private event rental. I created a landing page under my LLC. Different name, different domain, no hint of family ties, and posted the space as a private waterfront cottage with history and charm. Perfect for curated retreats or charity functions. The date? Same as their holiday weekend booking, gone. Every towel rotation and seating chart they built. Erased with one email, I didn't stop there. I accepted a reservation through a local nonprofit looking for a quiet place to host a donor appreciation night. Turns out they were honoring survivors of family estrangement. The symmetry almost made me laugh. I recopied the door code, reset the Wi-Fi, replaced their playlist on the speakers with soft jazz and sound-healing meditations. And still, I said nothing. The group chat ballooned with updates about potato salad and sparklers. I answered exactly once. A thumbs-up emoji. That was it. On their chosen check-in day, I drove by the house at a distance. Watched the lights dim and the guests in business attire arriving with flowers and framed portraits. My phone buzzed. Jackson. Why are there strangers in the house? Lol, I didn't answer. 10 minutes later, my mother's name flashed on the screen. I turned the phone over. Let the chaos bloom. The second they told my kids not to come again, I knew I'd made the right decision. Lily came to me gently, like she was the one trying not to hurt me. They said Jackson wants a quieter atmosphere this weekend, she said, twisting her necklace with both hands. Grandma said it's just better that way. But it's okay, Mom. It wasn't okay. And it would never be again. Because this time, I wasn't just keeping them from walking into another rejection. I was building something better. For them, for me, for everyone who'd ever found themselves on the wrong side of that guest list. I already had the event planned. The property was now officially blocked from any family use that weekend. The contract was signed, the guests selected. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the event wasn't just for strangers. I'd chosen every name on that invitation list myself. Lucinda, the nanny who cared for me when my parents couldn't be bothered, who was fired mysteriously after standing up for me when I was 13. Cousin Maya, who came out at 18 and was never invited back to a single holiday dinner afterward. Ricky, who used to mow the lawn every summer, and once told me, at 15, "You're the only one who asks if I want water." People my family discarded like out-of-style clothing. People who had been good, generous, kind, but not golden. I called them one by one, not with apologies but with invitations. "You're welcome here," I told them. "Come as you are, eat well. You deserve that much." I left my name off the listing, styling the event as a networking mixer for community builders and legacy makers. But everything about it came from my hands. Every floral detail, every scent in the air, every color draped across the fence posts. There were no throne chairs, no special wine glasses, no whispered conspiracies passed like hors d'oeuvres, just music, laughter, and stories stretching across the porch where my children weren't welcome, but should have always ruled. And then, they showed up, right on schedule. Dad's pickup pulled into the gravel like he owned it. Mom stepped out in her usual wide-brimmed hat, clutching a cooler. Jackson rolled up seconds later in a rental convertible, music loud enough to shake the gulls from the roof. I saw them from the security camera feed on my phone, just one swipe away while I stood in the kitchen, checking on hors d'oeuvres. The look on my mom's face when she saw the strangers traipsing through her house was something I saved in my mind's scrapbook. She marched up the porch, tried the keypad. No luck. She pressed the doorbell 4 times. My event coordinator answered, polite but firm. "This is a private event," she said. "I'm sorry, there's no one here by that name on the guest list. Could I help you find somewhere else to be?" I watched Jackson double-take at the sign on the yard. Private event, sponsored by Daughters Rising Foundation. Daughters Rising. That was me. They were locked out. Not just physically, but emotionally, generationally, cosmically. All the times they drew circles I didn't fit inside, I finally drew my own. My mother called me. 3 times. My father sent a single text, "What is this bullshit?" I didn't answer either of them. Instead, I turned off my ringer and went out to the back patio where everyone was clapping for Lucinda, who just told a story about the time she taught me how to braid hair on a crooked front step. Lily and Noah sat quietly in the corner beside Maya, listening, smiling, loved. They weren't too loud, they weren't too much, they were seen. And for the first time in my life, so was I. I heard the shouting before I saw him. My father's voice, barking across the driveway like he was still the king of somewhere important. "I built this house. I paid for every square inch. You think you can lock us out like squatters?" I stayed inside by the kitchen window, watching him pull at the screened porch door, like a man who hadn't lost anything in decades. And then he moved to the side gate, shouting, "You'll regret this. You think this is funny?" The guests inside stiffened, unsure. But I stayed calm, placed the last folded napkin on the buffet, and grabbed the envelope I had left by the pantry. This wasn't chaos. It was clarity, finally arriving right on time. I stepped outside. Mom was standing by the car now, arms crossed, jaw set like a statue that refused to crack. Jackson stared at his phone, as if the screen might offer him an escape from the humiliation currently blooming around him like wildfire. "Hi," I said with a smile. Dad threw his arms in the air. "You have some nerve. What the hell is going on?" "What's going on," I said evenly, "is that this is a private event, held on co-owned property. My property." His mouth opened, shut. "You don't," he started, but I calmly cut in. "I do," I said. "The check I wrote in 2013, the one you said you'd handle on paper, The deed addendum you had filed under joint interest to make it easier for tax purposes? The original renovation payout that came from Aunt Jo's trust? I pulled the envelope from my hand and held it up. This is the copy of the revocation of your administrative rights. You were notified by certified mail last week. Maybe check your mailbox next time, instead of gaslighting your granddaughter into thinking she's the problem. His face darkened. He looked across the house, at the porch, the people, the noise that didn't include him. But my mother finally spoke, her voice shaking just slightly. Your name was never on the deed. My name was kept off the family documents, I said. Because, as I recall, you didn't want to confuse church friends, since I wasn't Daniel. You said I didn't have the right optics for ownership. She took a step back. I hadn't raised my voice once. I handed her the envelope. Inside is the termination of the Family Trust Support Fund. Line item 6 says it clearly. Any distributions reliant on my contributions cease retroactively. You lost that support the minute you excluded my children from a property I have financial stake in. Congratulations, you've officially outplayed yourselves. She didn't open it. She just stared at it like it might explode in her hand. Behind me, the laughter from the event continued. Lucinda's voice, sweet and bright, rang through the salt air like a hymn of survival. I don't want your money, Dad spat. You've been living off it for years, I said. Funny how pride always shows up after deposits clear. Jackson closed the distance between us then, voice low. Auntie, come on. You really want this all over social? People are watching. I turned to him, calm as glass. I recommend telling your followers you got lost and stumbled into a fundraiser. Say you donated. That should keep the algorithm happy. His ears flushed red. I folded my hands, still smiling. You taught me this, you know. All of you. How to survive in silence. How to catch things people didn't say out loud. How to dress pain like politeness. Then I leaned in. Just enough for them to feel it, but not enough for the guests to hear. You just never thought I'd use it on you. And then I turned. The envelope still held gently in their hands, and walked back through the gate I now owned. It came late at night, a text, unsigned but obvious. Jackson didn't bother hiding his identity, just dropped into my inbox like someone still assuming doors would open if he knocked the right way. Hey, I know this is random, but is there any way I could stay in the guest room this weekend, just to lay low? I stared at the screen for a while, then checked the news. 3 blogs had picked up the story already. Some influencer watchdog account had posted side-by-side screenshots, Jackson's mockery of the shack against an image of the same porch decorated for the daughter's rising fundraiser. My caption had gone semi-viral. Every home holds a story. Some just won't let you tell it. People were livid in the comments. Imagine calling your own family's place a dump, just before a charity event honoring cancer survivors. Gross. This is why generational wealth doesn't equal character. Entitled brat energy. Hope his followers drop him. Apparently they had. His next photo got 100 unfollows in real time. Sponsorships paused, comments turned brutal, and now he needed somewhere to hide. Of course he thought of me. The one whose name he used to forget in birthday cards. The one whose kids didn't get a single hello from him, even when they handed him plates of food they'd helped prepare. Now I was the soft landing. I waited a few hours before replying, not because I was undecided, but because he needed to feel what silence really sounded like, the kind my children were given when they were dismissed like clutter. When I finally answered, I kept it simple. Guest rooms not available. My kids had to pack up in silence. Now, so will you, he read it immediately. I could see the 3 dots pop up, then stop, then reappear. Eventually, one more message buzzed through. Look, I didn't know. I didn't tell them to send the kids home. You know how Grandma is. And there it was. Half apology, half push-off. You know how Grandma is. As if decades of erasure counted for less because someone else held the knife. No one ever takes full responsibility in families like this. There's always tradition to blame. That's just how it's always been. You know how they are. But my kids? They didn't know. They just felt the door close. They just stood quiet while a suitcase was handed to them like a leash. No, Jackson. You don't get absolution because your gravy train hit a bad track. You got canceled by strangers. I got erased by blood. There's a difference. I didn't reply. Again, I blocked the number, then turned off my phone for the night and walked down the hallway, checking the bedrooms where Lily and Noah were already asleep. Lily had left her sketchbook on the nightstand again. I picked it up to tuck it away and paused when I saw the page, a pencil drawing, our beach house, detailed with little stick figures waving from the porch. A note printed carefully at the bottom. Next time, we won't pack so early. I sat beside her for a while, heart full with a kind of pain that didn't sting anymore. It just held shape. Because we were setting the terms now. Not them. Not ever again. I didn't call it a reunion. That word had too much history on it. Too much weight, too many times. I'd sat at those long family tables, napkin in my lap, throat tight with things I wasn't allowed to say. This was something else. We just called it dinner at the shore. A little gathering. Nothing fancy, just people who had once been pushed out of the picture now stepping back into frame. No invitations were mailed. Just quiet texts, a few calls, and a single message posted in a private group. If you've ever felt forgotten by the people who should have remembered. We'd love to have you. They came. Not all, but enough. Cousins I hadn't seen in years. Aunt Shirley, who hadn't been invited to Christmas since 2012, showed up with brownies and a new cane. Maya brought their partner. Ricky even wore a tie. Lucinda clutched Lily's hand like it had never let go. My children were everywhere. Laughing, running barefoot in the grass, passing out lemonade glasses they'd made themselves. Their names finally spoken first instead of last. At sunset, Noah and Lily performed a little song they'd written just for the night. Something sweet and silly about rebuilding things from the inside out. There wasn't a dry eye on the patio. As the last verse ended, Lucinda raised a glass and said what no one ever had. Not at a dinner. Not in my childhood. Not in all the years I'd quietly held up corners of a crumbling foundation. To those who held the line alone, until the rest of us found it again. Everyone clinked their glasses. I didn't make a speech. I didn't need to. Because something rare was happening. Something even more powerful than revenge. The unspoken rules were being rewritten. Not in courts or bank accounts, but in eye contact. In warmth, in who got invited and who didn't. My parents weren't talked about much that night. But when they did come up, it wasn't with anger, just absence. Their names no longer held the gravity they'd once used to pull us into orbit. A family friend, Mrs. Leary, who used to braid my hair after church while my mom chatted with the important people, walked over to me near the buffet table and smiled. "You know," she said gently. "They always underestimated you, because you were quiet and kind. They thought that meant small, and?" I asked, almost laughing. She leaned in and whispered, "Now look at you." The private had become powerful, not with microphones or cameras or fireworks, but with dignity, with boundaries, with people gathering not because they were born to, but because they wanted to. I stood quietly as people hugged each other goodbye, lingering long past sunset. The light strung across the porch cast a soft glow over the grass, and I felt a peace I didn't have words for. Not everyone gets this kind of closure. Sometimes the ones who hurt you keep winning, keep narrating the story like they own it. But that night, every seat at the table was filled by someone who knew what it meant to be left out, and who showed up anyway, and the ones who thought they were irreplaceable. They had fallen off the list. They didn't know I co-owned the house, not really. Sure, they remembered the checks, the calls, the "we'll pay you back eventually" conversations. But they didn't think I'd ever hold them to it. They thought my silence was surrender. They mistook my willingness to help as permission to forget. They didn't know I'd kept every receipt, every deed, every clause buried in the fine print. They didn't know I filed the revocation paperwork with steady, hands in zero regret. They didn't know my name was on the title, just not the parts they ever bothered to read. They didn't know Lily and Noah spent a week folding towels and scrubbing sand from floors while Jackson posted, TikToks and flipped his hair in curated sunlight. They didn't know what it felt like to watch your children come home early, confused about why love had terms. They didn't know I sat in the kitchen that night and stared at the note Mom left in their to-go bag. "See you soon," and realized soon was over. They didn't know who I became when I stopped needing their validation. They didn't know that staying polite had been the one thing protecting them all this time. But most of all, they didn't know this story was never about them. Not anymore. Now, it's about the sound of my children laughing on the beach. We came back, weeks later, quietly, without notice. Just us. We didn't need a holiday to claim what was ours. We didn't need permission to fill the space with joy. Lily brought her paints and spent all afternoon sketching the dunes. Noah made driftwood swords and chased imaginary dragons across the sand. I sat on the porch with a book I didn't read, watching the ocean move like it had been waiting for us to return without apology. There was no parade, no audience, just the warm wind and the knowledge that we were finally where we belonged. Later that evening, they built a campfire in the little pit out back, one that had sat unused for years because my father always insisted fire was too messy for the view. My kids didn't care about that. They just wanted to roast marshmallows and tell ghost stories and let their voices be loud enough to touch the stars. And I let them, because loud isn't bad. Sensitive isn't weak. I grew up thinking strength looked like silence. That dignity meant shrinking in the corner of family spaces, always grateful for just one chair. I know better. Now strength is choosing to stop chasing people who need you. Small. It's teaching your children they don't exist at someone's convenience. It's building a life. Not from revenge, but from redirection. And yes, it's also about justice. The quiet, thorough, undeniable kind. We slept in the guest room Jackson once called musty. It smelled like lavender now. The next morning, as the sun cracked open the sky, I stood barefoot on the back porch, coffee in hand, watching footprints pattern the shore like proof we'd been here, that we existed fully, joyfully, loudly. My daughter climbed the steps beside me and leaned her head on my arm. "This place feels different with just us," she said. "It is different with just us," I whispered. Then I looked back at that house, the one I was never supposed to own, never supposed to manage, never supposed to remember was mine, and I smiled. They didn't know, but now, it no longer mattered, because we did, and we'd keep building from the silence they gave us, into something that could finally speak.